This is Magic and Mortar. Welcome back, everyone. We have another video for you today. A little bit of a longer video, but we have a lot to cover. So you're looking at a battle map that I created, and I'm going to be showing you my process that I use to make this, okay? We have a lot of tips and tricks for expanding foam, which is what this is primarily created out of. We use something called EZ Water from Woodland Scenics. I have tips and tricks on that. And then also I've added some LEDs. I'm going to show you a very simple and easy way to add LEDs to your piece, all right? Battle maps are a great way to get your players fully immersed into the scene you've created. They're excellent for special encounters or boss fights or anything like that. And lastly, before we begin, shout out to YouTube user Kassoon, Kassoon. Thank you so much for watching the ice wall tutorial and entering the raffle over there. And you, my friend, were the winner of that, so congratulations. Please get a hold of us, get us a shipping address, and we'll get that package in the mail to you. All right? Everyone, thank you for being here, so sit back and enjoy. Alright, so very quickly here before we get started, I just want to mention in this video I will be doing some things incorrectly because I want to show you how to correct those mistakes. But if you are planning on doing this at home, I highly recommend that you base this project on something much stronger than foam, okay? You want to use probably an MDF board. You could use plywood, though plywood is probably very strong and it might make the project harder to work with. Okay, so catching up very quickly here, you just saw me cutting out my piece. I believe this was 16 inches by 16 inches. You can make it whatever size you want. You can add a grid if you'd like. You don't even have to. A lot of the grid might not even show up on the final product. Alright, so adding LEDs to your terrain can add really cool effects to your pieces. I think a lot of people shy away from the LEDs because they don't know where to begin. It's confusing. They don't have the tools to solder all the pieces together and such. Well, it's a lot easier than that. If you want to add LEDs but you don't know what you're doing, just like me, all you have to do is go to a craft store and look for LED strips, or you can even go to like a supermarket. If you look in the lawn and garden section, you can find LED strips, or if you want to, you can check any kind of like wedding decoration aisles and they sell LED strips as well. So all you have to do is go out, buy one of those for like $6 or $7, and then come back, and you can see what I'm doing here is I'm just mapping out my strip on the board here. I'm trying to see what shapes I can come up with that are going to fit my LEDs. Once you visualize the piece with the LEDs, go ahead and just trace that wire. I was thinking in my head, where am I going to put my pool of lava, because I want to illuminate it with the LEDs once the piece is finished. This next step is very important if you're using expanding foam. When expanding foam cures, it's going to pull and tug at the base that it's mounted on. So I'm going to cut a piece of flimsy styrofoam to put on top of that foam core board. And that way you'll see right after this, when I spray the expanding foam and it starts to cure, it's not actually going to pull and warp on the foam board. It's going to pull and warp on this thin layer of cheap styrofoam that I've put on top of the foam board. So now we are prepping our board for the expanding foam step. I do not want expanding foam going in my lava pool, so I'm just very quickly going to fasten down with some tape that LED strip. And now here's a trick you can do with some foam here if you want to do this at home. Turn your LEDs on and then put the foam layer on top of that. And you might have to go turn off another light or two so you can see better. Let's see if I do that. There we go. So now you can kind of see a little bit the glow of the LEDs is shining through. So now you've got a nice outline to follow. All you're doing here is cutting out the shape of that lava pool you just created. I did this step. I did 2-in-1 here. I was using my hot pen knife, which is a foam cutter. And so I was actually just tracing and cutting it all out at the same time. But if you want to, you can just use a permanent marker or something and just trace that outline and then cut the shape out. So here we are with the shape that we just traced. All you want to do is cut it out at this point. I'm using my hot pen knife here, but you can use whatever tools you have available. The hot pen knife, I can't recommend it enough. It's very affordable and it'll save you so much time and clean up, so go ahead and get one if you don't have one. Now that we have our shape cut out, we are going to just simply start gluing that down. Something to note here, at some point in this project, you will have to decide when you want to include your LEDs, when you want to make them a permanent part of the terrain. I have done LEDs at the beginning and at the end of the terrain. I have found at the beginning to work much better. You'll see in a few minutes here that after we've done the spray foam, the LEDs actually fit in perfectly. I recommend doing the LEDs early on. If you wait to do them towards the end of the project, you actually end up having to take some of the terrain apart just to get the lights where you want them to go. So be careful with that. Important note, when you are gluing the styrofoam down here, you don't want to glue the entire piece down. I just go around the outside edges of the piece and glue that down, because when you use that expanding foam, that spray foam, it's going to start to cure, and like I said earlier, it will pull and tug on the surface that it's bound to, so you want some of that styrofoam to give away, otherwise it's going to warp the board underneath. I'm also going to attach just some walls to the sides of my piece here. When I spray that expanding foam in there, I want it to kind of build up. I don't want it to expand out over the edges. It's up to you. You can see I'll leave the other side unboxed and just kind of show you how I approach using expanding foam when I know it has nowhere to go, and then also when I know it has somewhere to go. You just want to be careful with the expanding foam because it expands quite a bit larger than the initial amount that you put down. Great stuff, spray foam insulation. This is the expanding foam that I use for most of my projects. It creates a very good organic looking piece of terrain, so it's very good for anything really found in nature, hills, valleys, mountains, stuff like that. Alright, so you'll go ahead and just start applying it to the styrofoam there. In the corner where I know it can't go anywhere but up, I'm going to apply it very thickly. Is that a word? I don't know. But anyways, yeah, so we're just going to apply a lot of foam in the corner here, and then as I go around the outsides, I need to be extremely careful. So one thing I will warn when you're using this foam is you should probably wear gloves. I don't have gloves because I'm an idiot. This stuff will get on your skin, and it does not come off with hardly anything. It actually says on the bottle, if you do get it on your skin, it says to remove mechanically, which basically means get a knife and start scraping it off, which is not fun. So be careful when you're using this spray foam. You're going to want to let that spray foam cure for at least 8 hours. I usually just do mine overnight. And now you're going to see here how important that layer of styrofoam was there. You can see how much that spray foam had pulled up on the styrofoam layer, which is great because you see how straight it left the foam board there, which is exactly what we wanted. And actually it was kind of a nice bonus that the styrofoam layer got pulled up a little bit, because we're going to place our LEDs in before we move any further. And with that gap there, it'll really help us to get the LEDs in place. Alright, now just grab a knife or some kind of tool that will help you separate some of that styrofoam that we glued on. That was there just to help keep the styrofoam, the spray styrofoam in place. And here you go, you can see another view of how sizable that gap was. And you can see again why we need to have that styrofoam in place, because you don't want your board underneath to have that bow in it. Alright, so for our next step, we are going to prep the piece for our LED placements. What you want to do right now is just kind of get pieces together, get them in place. We're trying to fill up all the gaps that the expanding foam created. So if you still have that bit of styrofoam that you cut out earlier to make that shape for your board, just grab that piece, shave off the edge, maybe an inch or a half inch, and you'll see that that will fit right into the gaps there. Moving forward, we are also going to start shaping our piece, getting it all together. We want the basic shape to come together, and then we'll put our LEDs in place. That way we can move on with finishing touches, and we don't have to worry about ruining any of those finishing touches with the LED placement. When it comes to carving your piece, there isn't a tremendous amount of tips and tricks. A lot of the spray foam kind of organically creates wonderful shapes. Now, obviously, you want the piece to be playable, so go ahead and I usually grab a serrated knife for this expanding foam. The hot foam cutters don't do very well with this stuff, and honestly, if you try to start burning your way through, you're going to get a really nasty chemical smell, probably because this stuff was formulated to insulate your house. It wasn't meant to really be a craft supply. So if you do start burning it, I wouldn't even recommend that because it's going to smell bad. It's probably really bad for you. Yeah, so anyway, back to the playability of the piece. Don't forget that when we're making these structures, the whole reason behind it is so that we can use it in our campaigns. So don't get carried away with like the realistics of the piece coming together and making it look super awesome. Like, that's important, but it's more important that we can actually get the characters up there and play with it. So if you start cutting away and you're like, well, that looks cool, but I don't know if I could do anything with it, well, just keep cutting away, because you need to have places for your characters to stand, and they can't stand on, you know, the side of a mountain. So have fun with this part. It's totally up to you. Just use your imagination, and then just come up with a rough shape and kind of piece it all together. Now, when it comes to making like rocks out of this spray foam, you can kind of see that the spray foam, just the way it cures naturally, it kind of will bubble up and make these round shapes for you. So really all you have to do is just accentuate the edges of the rocks, which I'm kind of just showing you an example right here. If you grab your X-Acto knife or just grab some kind of cutting tool and just start peeling away, shaping the edges of the rock, it'll come together for you in just some few really easy steps. All right, we are prepped and ready for LED placement, so the next step is just simply putting your LEDs in. We are going to feed one end of the LED strip through that gap on the side. You do need to account for your battery placement here. Make sure that when you mount this, the switch is accessible and the battery plate is accessible so that you can both turn off and on the LEDs, but also replace the batteries. I've made that mistake before, so just be mindful when you're putting your battery pack in. Simply take your styrofoam pieces that you've already shaped, maybe shape them a little bit further to account for the LED placement, and start hot gluing that styrofoam in. Be careful not to block the actual source of light when you're getting these LEDs in place. Here is a helpful tip for you. When you're working with LEDs, leave the strip on. That way, if at any point during construction they all of a sudden go out, you can go back and fix it before it is too late. Take a minute to appreciate your handiwork so far. Make sure all your lights are working. Inspect the piece for maybe any changes you want to make before you move on. The further along we get, the more permanent our decisions become. So this, I think, is an undervalued step in the creation process here. There's a lot of creative juices flowing. You just want to make sure that it's all going to come together. So there's nothing wrong with taking a second to look at your work and make sure that it's going to all come together properly in the end. And before we get ready to start putting our coat of drywall compound on this, we need to get our battery pack in place and mount it. Don't forget the orientation of your battery plate cover there. You want to make sure that's accessible. You also want to make sure the switch is accessible. Now, this battery pack was kind of funny. The switch was on the other side, so I actually just had to carve out a spot for it where I could get a finger back there to hit the on and off button. So maybe that'll be something for you to consider while you're at the store looking at those LED strips. Again, I recommend a serrated blade to dig into that spray foam there. So go ahead and finish cutting out a spot where your battery pack is going to fit. We are going to hot glue it into place there. But any part that's supposed to move, I always take that part off. Like you just saw, I removed the battery pack cover there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just push some hot glue down in the sides, being careful not to get hot glue where it shouldn't be here. Alright, now with the battery pack in place, I'm moving on to another step here that I do not recommend for a couple of reasons. You can see I'm trying to burn a grid pattern into that expanding foam. Two reasons I don't think you should do this. One, it's not really going to be that noticeable in the end. More importantly, this expanding foam is a polyurethane-based spray foam, and it is actually hazardous to breathe in that smoke that you see burning off of the hot wire cutter there. So I just don't advise doing this. If you want to add a grid pattern, do it mechanically. Maybe bevel some corners there with a sharp knife or something. Just don't burn it like I am here. Alright, now what you want to do is get some all-purpose joint compound. This is drywall mud, okay? So the reason we are adding this to our piece here is for a couple of reasons. One, we're working with different materials here, different types of foam. So this compound is going to unify that and bring it all together, so it's going to be very uniform for our painting process. The other reason we do this is because it helps seal the entire product, and it adds a very nice hard layer that adds to the durability of the overall piece once it dries. It is recommended to let this drywall compound cure for about 24 hours, so do be careful of that. Also, you'll see here, if I'm working with LEDs and I'm sealing my project, I like to turn the LEDs on so that I can make sure I'm not covering the actual light source with that drywall mud. You'll also want to go ahead and coat the battery cover here and work your way around the actual battery pack. Just be careful again that you're not getting this anywhere it shouldn't be. Just keep the contacts clean, really. That's all you have to worry about. The rest can all be fixed. Alright, next we are going to be applying a 50-50 mixture here, half Mod Podge, half black paint. We're doing this for a couple reasons. One, it's going to apply a very nice dark base coat for our painting. It's going to help with all the shadows and undertones. Two, it's going to further seal the project. We're going to be using the Woodland Scenics EZ Water in this video, and that stuff is a little bit tricky. You'll see later as we get closer, I explain more about that, but you want to seal the project, honestly, as often as you can with many layers because of that EZ Water. It's a little tricky to use. Remember here that we want to leave the LEDs on so that if we do accidentally cover them with that black Mod Podge mixture, we can recognize our mistake and fix it right away. Really easy fix, just grab something close by, paper towel, piece of leftover styrofoam, even your finger if you want, and just dab some of that black paint off. Remember to paint your battery pack cover as well with that Mod Podge, and then just allow 20-30 minutes to dry. Mod Podge dries very quickly. You can wait a little bit longer if you want to. Just come back, see if it's dry. If it's not, wait another 15 minutes. Alright, now we are on to the painting phase of our project here. With all of my projects, I use acrylic paints. They're cheap, they dry really quickly, they blend very well. I love using acrylic, I don't see an issue with it. For this project in particular, we're going to start with a burnt umber color. Make sure you leave the LEDs on. It's always wise to do that. Just make sure you're not painting over them at any point during this process. So start with your burnt umber. Get a good amount on the brush there. And remember, we're not forcing this brown down into the cracks. We're applying it heavily, but if you go over a crack and it doesn't get down in there and you still see the black paint on there, that's good. We want that black paint in those crevices to look like shadows later on. Alright, so the process we'll be following here, we're just going to be using a lighter brown with each coat we do, and we're going to be using a less amount of paint with each coat. So we're basically trying to create that transitional shadow with the dark base coat moving to a lighter brown, to a lighter brown, to a lighter brown, and then finally just doing like a very light dry brush highlight. The color that I'm using here is a nutmeg, so go ahead and fill your brush with that nutmeg brown, maybe add a little bit of white if it's not light enough, and then you're just going to go ahead and brush it gently over the surfaces without trying to force it down into the crevices. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and we're using the same brush through this whole process here. So with the same brush, just start incorporating a lot more white here. And then as you get closer and closer to your final top coats, you want to start using more and more of a drier brush with a lighter hand. So you can see here, using just a light hand, trying to just get the highlights on the very top there with that lighter brown color. Alright, now to add some color, because I was realizing the brown was kind of boring, not my style. I wasn't really enjoying it very much, so we're just going to use primary red and yellow here and just kind of mix that together. This is a lava piece after all, so kind of emanating from where the source of the lava would be, we are going to start adding some red and yellow and orange highlights, and I think that this just really started to bring the piece all together here. So when I was painting this piece and adding the color to it, I just really started to enjoy all the different colors and how it was coming together. It really kind of made it come to life. It was taking away from that boring brown. The brown was a great base coat to start. but I really felt like adding the colors kind of just made everything start coming to life. So I went a little crazy and I just started adding a lot of different splashes of yellow and orange and red in all different areas. And there is no rhyme or reason to this. You can add as much color wherever and however you want. It's your piece, it's your imagination, so just go crazy with it. Next, we're going to be working on the lava itself. I have a really wonderful technique for this. I have another video that I put up explaining how to make a crackle technique for your lava, so please check that video out. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth here. You can see we're going to go ahead and just put down just a primary yellow. We're going to cover the entire surface of that lava with the yellow. Use a steady hand and some patience here. You don't want to cover your LEDs all the way. Now sometimes adding a little bit of paint over top of an LED, you can affect the color that it is. These are just plain white LEDs, so a little bit of the paint in this video I do put over top of those LEDs just to change the color to more of a yellow, but that's totally up to you. Alright, now here we are actually going to be adding a little bit of this watered down Mod Podge with some red paint. This is going to go over top of our yellow paint there. The reason I'm adding the Mod Podge here is because we are going to be using the EZ Water Woodland Scenics pourable water here, and it pours extremely hot. So I'm trying to seal and protect all of my terrain here so that when we do get to the EZ Water step, it doesn't just eat away and melt at all the paint and the foam. Next, we're going to use One Step Crackle by Deco Art. Alright, you're going to go ahead and apply this all to the top layer there. Again, go check out that video if you want more tips on how to crackle. This is going to break up that red layer of paint so that it will reveal the yellow underneath, and it will look like the yellow is cracked up through the red lava. After that coat of crackle has dried, we're going to go ahead and take a liberal amount of yellow paint, and we're going to go ahead and brush that over top of the red. That yellow paint is going to go ahead and seep down into all of those cracks we just created, and it's just going to add more emphasis on the bright yellow cracks showing through the red lava. Alright, now we are almost ready to do the Woodland Scenics EZ Water. I'm going to add another layer of some Mod Podge here. Again, I'm just sealing the layer of crackle and paint that I put down because the EZ Water pours very, very hot, and it will affect the paint that you have down there if you're not careful. It will eat away at the paint, it will melt the foam, so you want to put down quite a few layers of some kind of sealant just to make sure that your terrain piece is going to stay intact. Dab away some of those brush strokes if you don't want those to be prominent, so that's what I'm doing right here. Alright, so right off the bat here, I'll start by saying Woodland Scenics does a really great job at almost everything, but the EZ Water is very difficult to use, which is why I am making this part here on the video to show you. If you have the choice, I would use the Realistic Water. They both have pros and cons, but the Realistic Water will give you a wonderful product in the end with very little hassle. The EZ Water, you'll see you have to heat it up very slowly. You have to use a disposable foil here. It will ruin whatever pot you want to use. That's why you gotta use disposable. If it gets too hot, it will kind of change the watercolor to yellow, etc., etc. Anyways, so you'll start with your disposable foil on the burner here. Set it to a low heat, 100, 150 maybe. This will take maybe 10-15 minutes to melt all the beads. This stuff gets very hot. If you get it on your skin while it's liquid, it'll just burn your skin and then stick to your skin. So just wear gloves, have an oven mitt close by. Be careful when you're using the EZ Water on the stovetop just like this. If you are going to tint EZ Water, you need a powdered fabric dye. It says to use a very small amount of this fabric dye. I found that to be not enough, so I ended up using quite a bit, maybe 7 or 8 times what the recommendation was. It also says to add the fabric dye while it's not melted and then mix it. I did both ways, melted and not melted, and it seemed to be fine either way. Alright, it'll start to look like this when it's melting. Don't use plastic. You can see if you try to use a spoon, like a plasticware like this, it will just melt the spoon or the fork. If you do have to do any mixing, make sure you just have some toothpicks close by or something you can throw away. I have to stress again, be very careful. This stuff gets very, very hot. It's basically molten plastic, so do not get it on your skin. It'll burn you and you'll have to peel it off. Alright, so be careful when you're handling this. Make sure you've got like an oven mitt, maybe a cutting board to set the pan on because it's going to be very hot. You'll want to keep your terrain piece close by just like this because you're going to have to pour very quickly when you take it off of the heat. Alright, so this pour here had me a little bit nervous. I've used EZ Water before, but never this hot, so I do believe I had the temperature up a little bit too high. I went into panic mode for a second, but, you know, better to have it too hot for educational purposes than not hot enough and then have someone else make it too hot at home. I'm going to go ahead and pour the entire pan in there. It will spread out on its own, but you can kind of see it's bubbling away, and it does do a little bit of damage to our piece here, but that's okay because I'm going to show you how to cover up and fix any bits of foam that do melt away. I also just want to stress for a third time that you're extremely careful when you're doing this. You can see how easily this could eat away at your foam if you weren't careful, and then just spread out onto the kitchen table and onto the floor. If you're not careful, you could do some damage, so just make sure you take all the proper precautions. I actually brought a box fan out to start cooling it off after I realized that, hey, this was taking too long and I was getting a little bit nervous. Feel free to use some wooden sticks, toothpicks, chopsticks, whatever you have to work some of the bubbles out. Do be careful when the EZ Water starts to harden, and if you try to manipulate it in a hardening state, you will create stiff peaks, you will scratch the surface. It's easy to fix, but at this point forward, anything we do to the EZ Water is going to start affecting the actual piece of terrain. So just be careful, be aware of that. If you're going to be using the Woodland Scenics EZ Water, you must have a heat gun, okay? A blow dryer will not do the job. You need to have a heavy-duty heat gun. Here you can see how to repair the surface of your EZ Water. If it's too bubbly, if it's scratched, go ahead and get your heat gun out and just start applying heat evenly to the top of that, and it's going to go ahead and work out all of the imperfections. And here I'm just showing you side by side the area that we worked on, how clean and smooth it is, and then all the other areas that are still bubbly that need work. You do want to be careful though, because the more and more you use that heat gun, the more heat you expose your piece to. And the more we expose the piece to heat, you're going to start cracking your paint and stuff like you see here. So if your paint does crack away and the expanding foam is affected by the heat, just take a little bit more of that drywall compound and just fill in any cracks that you find. The unfortunate part to this step is that, yes, that drywall compound does take a very long time to dry, so you are delaying your finished product. Okay, now I have to point out something that happens if you're mounting this EZ Water on a foam core board. Obviously, the extreme heat of that EZ Water is going to warp your board, which is why at the beginning of the video, I highly recommend, if you're going to use EZ Water, make sure your base is something strong, okay? Look for that MDF board, maybe even use plywood. You just want to be careful that if you're using EZ Water, make sure that your base will not warp. Now, in the event that maybe you were following along with me and you did this on a foam board, or maybe you've already had a craft go bad using EZ Water on a foam board, this can fix it for you. This just causes more problems that we have to fix, but the good news is we can fix it all in the end. So if you just apply heat evenly to the bottom of your foam board, and then you take that foam board and turn it over and kind of bend that bow out of the board, you can do that. But unfortunately, what you're also going to do is that EZ Water, that plastic that just cured on the top side, you're going to crack that. So when that cracks, you'll have to go back and fix that with your heat gun. And now you can see we're kind of in this cycle where, okay, I've got to heat up the bottom to bend it back. Now I have to heat up the top to fix the water. Now I have to heat up the bottom to bend it back. And you've just created a world of trouble that is fixable, but it takes a lot of time and it's difficult. Now, I just wanted to give you an example of fixing one of those cracks we created on the top. You can do it, it is possible, but again, the problem that you're creating now is you're exposing more and more of your terrain to that heat that's coming off the heat gun here. So if it eats away at your foam, if it cracks your foam, you'll have to continue to fix all of those issues. Alright, now we get to add some of the finishing touches to our piece to make it all come together and look really, really cool. Alright, before we do that, so I'm pointing out to you right now, this was an area that got exposed to too much heat and actually the foam melted away there. So we're going to take some pieces of tree moss. I love using this tree moss. This makes really good bushes and shrubbery, and for this project specifically, it is going to hide any of those voids where the foam kind of melted away. We're just going to take some shrubbery, stick it down in those cracks there, and it's going to hide it all away from us, and it's going to make the piece look really cool at the same time. You can find tree moss like that in any of the floral sections in your craft stores. If you go into like a Hobby Lobby or a Michael's or something, go to the floral section, the garden section, and look around for tree moss. They have all different kinds and they all look really good on this miniature terrain stuff that we're making. In addition to all of the tree moss that we're adding as shrubbery, we're also adding a lot of other really cool things. I've got little tiny skulls. I have like bones for bone piles. I'm going to be scattering some rhinestones kind of across the platform over there. Just kind of indicating that, hey, there's treasure somewhere in this dungeon. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do, and if you're wondering where do you get all these little knickknacks, all you have to do, go to your craft stores, head over to the jewelry section. Like, look at this length of chain there, all right? That's from the jewelry section. All you have to do is go there, look at all the different knickknacks, look at all the beads. That's even where I get those quartz crystals you just looked at. It's all from jewelry. It's pretty affordable, and it adds such a really cool immersive element to your terrain pieces, so check that out. It's going to make your terrain really, really awesome. Everyone, thank you so much for watching another video here. I hope that all of our tips and our tricks, all the guidance we try to put in these videos really help you along your creative journeys. It's my goal that everyone who watches these can walk away from that and they can go out and feel like they can create these 3D elements to make their players just love their campaign even more. I'm always open to different ideas, so guys, leave it in the comments if you want to see me make something specifically, and I'll do it. We have another giveaway that we're planning coming up really soon here, so as always, please subscribe so that you're in the loop with everything that we're doing. Everyone, thank you so much for watching, and have a great night.